think the music's over.
Yeah, I muted it on my side, so that's what I always
Hey,
do.
guess what? It's another showtime.
Yay!
It's me and it's you and it's Thursday and we talk about bad people.
We do. Man, we still have a lot to get through with this guy,
This
too.
is crazy. So I'm going to have to ask you for a recap.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing with that. I think we left off with his civilian trial, which was later on, but
Yeah, we have
what
we
we're
have
talking about here.
hold on, we have one important thing to do first.
Oh, okay.
And that is to show Emerald.
Oh, yeah.
So here is Emerald in the hallway
Aw,
carrying
I
a
am.
carrying a dumbbell. So it's a dumbbell carrying a dumbbell.
uh,
Oh, we tease her about not being very bright, but only because she is.
aw,
She's a very bright
yeah.
girl.
The official Real Monsters puppy.
Yep. That's our palate cleanser before we dive into the nastiness of the world.
I wonder if we might want to show the
Disclaimer, the
cut.
warning.
Yes. I don't know why I can't think of this stuff right now, but yeah, the disclaimer.
Dear listeners, we're going to talk about bad shit. We may show
Yeah.
some ugly pictures. If this bothers you, why are you here?
Yes.
Look at the title
I,
of the show.
I've done my best to, I don't know if you could really say censor some of the crime scene photos, but it did add a little bit in there that you'll see. Um, I guess the recap, getting back to that, the the murders, the MacDonald murders, were in essence a Manson copycat. Any way that you look at it, they happened February 17th, 1970, at Fort Bragg, the military base in North Carolina. Um, you had a doctor, Dr. Jeffrey McDonald. He's a decorated Army surgeon, captain, in fact, who was found bleeding out on his floor next to his wife, who was stabbed 16 times. Her lungs punctured with an ice pick as well. And then his youngest child, Kirsten, 8 to 10 stab wounds in her bed. She was only 2. And Kimberly, his middle child, 6 blows to the head and 8 to 10 stab wounds, also found in her bed. The doctor only had superficial stab wounds and a punctured lung, which is going to be important when you look at the theories of the
Mm.
crime here. Because his story was that 4 hippies broke into their house and did this to him. And the Manson tie-in with that was they found pig written on the wall in Colette
That's
MacDonald's blood.
yeah. That's coming up here. I got that picture.
And this was only maybe 2 or 3 months after they arrested the Manson family. So, I mean, this was something that was still, percolating in the popular mind, something fierce at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now, the MPs, when they first got there, and the CID detectives, the military detective guys, thought that it was a murder-suicide upon first looking at it. And that was before they were able to give Dr. McDonald CPR.
Oh, okay.
But yeah,
So yeah,
so
he was injured pretty seriously, right? I mean, he had a
I
collapsed
mean,
lung.
he did. Other than that, though, it was really only superficial stab wounds. And the theory was with that as well that being a doctor, he's going to know how to make it look somewhat bad on himself if he were, doing that.
Well, he
Uh,
he would know how to cause himself. He would know where to stab himself if he was doing it himself, right?
right.
He would have a pretty good idea. I can make it look bad, but not really risk my life,
Yes.
type of thing.
And that is what the prosecution thought when they brought him up for the Article 32, which was it's the military equivalent of the civilian hearing, or basically an indictment before he would be court-martialed if they wanted that to go forward. And that's the thing with this. You have, the military system of justice that's going on too. But what we're going to get to and where we left off was his civilian trial, because he wasn't court-martialed. They went through the Article 32 and they found, nothing to
Yeah.
really tie it.
So let's clarify something. A court. A lot of people think that court-martial means you've been court-martialed. They treat it like a conviction. Court-martial is
Mm-hmm.
just a trial. Martial meaning military court.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Oh, exactly.
So just like civilian court, you can have any kind of outcome. To say that you've been to a court, brought up on charges in a court-martial, that just means you had a trial.
Yes. Oh, yeah, and if he would have been court-martialed here, they would have likely sent him to Leavenworth for life. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, when you're talking about that level of a crime. But the interesting thing there with that, though, is even if they had court-martialed him,
Yeah.
double jeopardy would not necessarily come into play. There's a
Really?
so if he got out of the military, and let's say for some weird reason he got out of Leavenworth, the
Yeah.
state of North Carolina could have still tried him for murder.
Now, why is that?
That is a legal term called the doctrine of separate supremes, which means there's separate jurisdictions in states that were affected, as it were. So you have the federal government, the military. They would view the murders as a crime against them
Mm-hmm.
for one set of it, and then the state could view it as a crime against the state. That is, North Carolina could view it that way. So you could technically have a conviction in both of those.
Does that obvious? I wouldn't think that happens very often.
It doesn't. In fact, the only other case that I found when I was looking this up was the case of a man, I can't remember his rank, but he was a bit higher up, and they caught him with child porn on his computer. The military court-martialed him, and then the case was also sent to the state, wherever he was. I can't remember the exact state. But their argument was that it wasn't double jeopardy because they were trying him on separate images that he owned, that he had on his computer. So he had like 10,000 of them.
Oh.
So they could do, 10,000 separate charges if they wanted. But his lawyers argued with that it was an infringement on his double jeopardy. And the military court, in fact, agreed when they heard it. So, I mean, this could go many, many ways when you're looking at how these
Yeah.
two systems interact with each other.
And the the procedures are and the rules, while similar and have a common foundation, they actually operate quite differently.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot in the Uniform Code of Military Justice that goes beyond what they could go after a civilian for, too.
Mm-hmm.
But the UCMJ also has its own provision against double jeopardy. So he couldn't be court-martialed twice.
Right.
but he could still have been court-martialed and tried. So,
I often wondered. So it just occurred to me, like, well, so maybe they get together with the state, and the military goes, "Yeah, we'll charge him with these two, and you charge him with that one."
they could have. They really could have. And in fact,
Right.
they might have done a bit of that. I'm going to have to take another look at the notes when we get further along through here. Um, but, before all this, they looked around a bit for the four hippies that were alleged to have gotten through there. And
Right.
there was this woman in a white hat, a 70s style hat, which I think we might have a picture of,
Oh,
that
let
they
me
were
see.
looking for by the name of Helena Stokely.
Oh, yes.
But that's where it got really weird. Ken Micah, who was the MP, the military police, the first guy on scene at the MacDonald house, says that he saw a woman in this style of hat at Fort Bragg when he was driving past there that night at about 3 a.m. I think it was at a gas station. He said he saw this woman leaning against it.
Yeah.
And then McDonald, he gives these descriptions of the hippies. And Micah, for whatever reason, said that that woman in that hat was not Helena Stokely, which is weird.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. So he claimed that does not bode well for him. I gotta say,
no.
and I'll explain what my reasoning on that. So he says, "Hey, there's this woman, and she's dressed like this. She looks like this." And the cop goes, "Oh yeah, I saw her." And he runs out and grabs her, brings her to him, and says, "This the one?" And he goes, "No."
Oh, no, it was Micah who said that the woman he saw before he got there wasn't Helena Stokely.
Oh,
Yeah.
so
Sorry,
they
I
so
didn't.
oh, so they grabbed a different one, or what?
They
What?
didn't grab her at all. He just saw her for about, a passing couple of glances as they were driving to the scene.
Okay.
And he said, I mean, even though she was wearing the same stuff that the doctor described to them,
Yeah.
Micah said that that was not Helena Stokely that he saw.
Okay.
And I'm honestly not sure how he would know that for certain,
Right.
with only seeing her with a brief glance.
Yeah,
But,
driving past. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and it seemed like when Errol Morris, the noted documentarian who did the FX's recent show on this, the A Wilderness of Error, based on Morris's book, when Morris talked to Micah about that, Micah seemed kind of standoffish. And I'm not sure why.
Hmm.
It was weird to watch. Like he Morris pressed him a bit on that, and he's like, "Yeah, I just know it wasn't her." And he said, "I didn't really know her, but I knew of her." Was that how he said it? But
That's a weird statement.
yeah, it is. It makes you think. But yeah, so they were going after her for a while, and she'll come back later for this story to be very important. But they never really found much as far as the hippies went, but the military didn't do all that great of an investigation before the Article 32. The defense attorney with that, who was brought in by McDonald, was his old roommate from one of the Ivy League schools. I think it was Yale they attended.
Okay.
And this guy, he had never tried a case before. He
Of
went
any
to law
kind?
school. Of any kind. And he went in there with this other slightly more experienced attorney from Philadelphia, and these guys tore apart the prosecution.
Oh. Oh, I was thought
Uh,
I thought saying, "Oh my God, these rookies, these inexperienced guys are going to get their hats handed to them." But
yeah,
no. Twist.
no.
Plot twist.
I, I mean, that was what he was saying, with that he thought that they were going to get their asses handed to them, but they didn't. And he said that speaks to just how badly they investigated this. And we've seen these problems time and time again with this scene too. I mean, how many cases have we looked at where there's no integrity with the crime scene?
Right.
Where you have, they said the defense grilled the guys who investigated this, the CID. They said there was about 27 people in and out of that house that day.
Oh, my word.
Yeah. And they had one guy, we talked a bit, I think, about the coffee table and how
Right.
that was turned over
Right.
a certain way. They had one
Hold on.
investigator that they talked to who said that he literally sat down on the couch and it put that coffee table a certain way and touched it. And there was another guy in there who had to tell this guy sitting on the couch to get the hell off, to don't do that. But, you know, it's weird, man. And then they had all these continuity errors, too, when you look at it, like with the phone, which we had a picture of.
Yeah.
With MacDonald's statement, it was off the hook. But the picture of it, I think, shows it's still on the hook. And that was because one of the investigators put it back up. Which, again, you do not do. And half of the problem there was the first photographer that went through the crime scene literally got sick. He couldn't finish it. They had to bring in another crime scene photographer hours later.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that is how poorly the military handled this.
All right, let me get this phone picture here.
But,
There it is.
yep. And then throughout all of this, he had his, Dr. McDonald's father-in-law, Freddie Kassab, was very much in his corner. In fact, his quote was, "If I had another daughter, I would still want the same son-in-law." That's what he said at the Article 32. And they had him as a character witness,
Right.
and he was standing in his corner for a long time. But things got weird and things changed there. After,
You know, you could just about bank on that happening.
yeah. Oh,
You
yeah.
know, when a father-in-law does that, you think, oh, he's going to be really disappointed.
Oh, yeah. Well, and Freddie Kassab, I mean, he was a guy with basically biblical levels of perseverance about him. Even after the Article 32, he went throughout the halls of Congress, literally beating on doors and saying, "You need to investigate this and catch whoever killed my daughter and my grandchildren."
Yeah.
You know, he was all over the government and the military trying to get this done, and it took him a very long time to get even a transcript of the Article 32. But throughout all this, Freddie got a little paranoid for whatever reason and started literally recording every telephone call he made. You know, and this is 1970, and
Right.
he's doing that.
So the technology to do this is really crude.
Yeah. I mean, he would literally have a big tape deck sitting by the phone.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he was all over it. And what happened with this was MacDonald ended up moving to Southern California, where he was the head of surgery in, I'll have to find the hospital as we're going. But he ended up down there. And what ultimately turned Freddie Kassab's thoughts about MacDonald on his head
Yeah.
was when he told Freddie that he and a bunch of his other buddies from Fort Bragg went out and they found one of the hippies and killed him.
Ah, right.
But Kassab found out that that was a lie. And he couldn't figure out why he would lie about that. But the way that he found out was he said he had a broken arm from doing that. Jeffrey McDonald did.
Why would you say
And
that?
I don't know.
That's
It was
the
very
dumbest
easy to
thing.
check.
That's very easy to check.
Especially,
It's
yeah,
so easy to
especially when you're
verify.
a surgeon. You're a surgeon and you're saying that.
Right. Because guess what you can't do with a broken arm? Surgery.
Yeah,
You can't do your job.
exactly. Exactly. And that's what ultimately turned him.
Oh.
It turned Freddy from being his fiercest defender to his fiercest enemy.
He'd have been better
And so,
off, cutting his arm a couple of times. And go,
yeah,
and just go, look, I got these scars from when I did that. Fought the guy. Right?
yeah,
A
yeah, or
broken arm?
something.
That's dumb.
It is.
Because
It is totally idiotic.
literally everybody in the department would know about it.
Yeah.
The janitor
Oh,
would
yeah.
know about it.
Like I said,
hey,
it was
you see
very
that
simple to
surgeon?
check.
That doctor with the broken arm? Everybody saw him for 6 weeks.
Yeah. I don't know why he would lie to begin with about going out and finding one of the hippies and killing him. That was kind of weird, too. But,
The only thing that comes to mind is that he was trying to keep him on his side, or
could be.
or to maybe he was trying to get him to back off on harassing the military about finding the killers.
That could be. Um, in fact, in the late 70s, it was a bit of progress with that because the feds actually sent investigators to take another look at this, non-military investigators.
Oh,
And they took a look at the whole crime. They didn't find much else. They found, though, that the hippie angle wasn't exactly fleshed out. And they generated about 240 leads that weren't exhausted at the time.
huh.
And now, interestingly, with this, we go down from Fort Bragg to Nashville, Tennessee, where a officer by the name of Jim Gaddis meets this weird waif-like woman just walking on the road in 1971, and he arrests her for possession, right? And while being booked, she says, I was involved in a murder in Fayetteville, Fort Bragg. And she goes into details, very small details of the scene. That was
Okay.
before they obviously knew much about it. But they checked it out. Her descriptions were accurate. And the Fayetteville detective that we had talked a bit about, Prince Beasley,
Yeah.
headed down to Tennessee, supposedly. And she says to him,
Got to check that out.
yeah. She says to him, though, that she didn't tell all she knew. But they had a polygraph examiner, of course. He said that, no, she's basically lying. But, it's a polygraph. It's not exactly reliable.
Yeah.
But, yeah, the feds, they were looking at Jeffrey McDonald again after looking at the hippie angles, despite what Helena Stokely said. And, it's interesting from the hippie side of it because there's a hypothesis that they might have went in there because at the time, Jeffrey McDonald was one of the doctors trying to help a lot of the men on base who were addicted to heroin.
Right.
There's some numbers from that time that put the amount of people addicted to heroin and speed on the base at about 40% in 1970.
Well, they can hardly be surprised about speed addiction since they were handing it out like Halloween candy.
Well, and you can't exactly be surprised with the heroin either,
No.
with Vietnam being the Golden Triangle, you know? That's where most of the world's opium was produced back then. I mean, since then it's switched to Afghanistan, but yeah. But he was one of the doctors who was trying to help a lot of these guys. Um, and there was no drugs, however, taken from the house when all this happened.
Okay.
Um,
So
and
we'll go. Can I backtrack to Helena? I got a very
yeah,
important to me question, and that
of
is,
course,
was she accurate in her descriptions?
she was for a lot of what they took down, especially early on. Um,
And
that's
was she
where,
did she give information that wasn't just in the news?
yeah, I'm pretty sure that she did.
And
Um,
so, what difference does it make if she passes a polygraph?
it shouldn't. I mean, you and I know full well that a polygraph is not really much more than a crude physiological reaction recorder.
Right,
It doesn't
which
really say anything.
except that you're nervous about being tested,
Yeah, yeah,
and
and
you can be trained to beat it in about an hour.
oh yeah, the funniest one is the sphincter trick with that.
Right, yeah, just messes it all up.
Tightening and relaxing your asshole, people. That'll help you beat a polygraph. Because all the major blood vessels of the body are down there.
Yeah, you just clench and release, and they just can't read you at all.
Yep. You know, with Helena, I think she was undoubtedly an unreliable narrator. If you, one thing I would recommend doing, I don't know if you watched it before the last time, that interview I sent that she did.
I did watch some of it. Yeah.
What did you think of her affect? That's what immediately caught me with it.
Stoner. I mean,
Flat, yeah.
she seemed well, very flat, but it could have been chemically induced, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it likely was because if you go back to the hippie part of this,
Hmm.
with MacDonald's story, the woman who was in there, if indeed it was Helena, was basically dancing around with a candle and shouting, "Acid is groovy," while the
Yeah,
rest of the family was being murdered. So,
which is a
um,
weird thing to say, but you know, from what I've observed, people who are on hallucinogenics are not exactly, um, active participants in reality.
no, no, and I think there's no doubt that she wasn't. Um,
and
yeah, she's just weird to
and
watch.
and so and you stack. Let's just say, um, let's just say she was there and she was on acid. She's gonna have some pretty weird memories that are
Hmm.
tinged with reality, but not really anchored in it.
Oh, absolutely. A memory's already fallible, but it's even more fallible when you're on a psychotropic drug like that.
Exactly right.
Um,
So the parts. So to finish this off, then she has. Let's say she was there. She was on acid. She did see things, but then when she's sober, she tries to stitch those things into a coherent narrative in her memory.
hmm And it
And
gets even more jumbled.
right.
I mean,
And
it's,
it comes
yeah.
across as not telling the truth, but her brain is just trying to make sense of it.
hmm I think
Probably
that
with
very well could be
memories,
the case.
probably with memories that are, you know, uh, you know, partial hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, well, obviously there wasn't a purple cow flying around the room, so let's edit that part out of the story and figure
Yeah.
out what can you say that people will believe.
Well, and it doesn't help with that interview that I sent you. I think it was done in '82 or something.
Hmm.
One of the people interviewing there was an FBI agent by the name of Ted Gunderson. And this guy, I was just looking for the sheet that I have on him because he is way interesting in and of himself.
Oh, Gunderson.
Uh, yes.
Son of a
Let's see.
Gunderson.
Damn it, where did I put those notes on him? He was the head FBI guy. He was the special agent in charge of the Dallas FBI office and a few others down that way. So he had, you know, some credibility for a little while. And then he starts going off the rails in the 1980s and lending his name to basically any conspiracy theory you can think of from that time. He was, for instance, the one that still, for until the day he died, was pushing the narrative that the McMartins in the McMartin preschool had secret tunnels that they were spiriting children through for devil worship.
Where are those secret tunnels exactly?
I suppose, yeah, there's his report, the Gunderson report. So,
There you see before you the cover of a volume that caused untold misery in this country.
yes, yes. And it was, like I said, it was lent the name of an FBI agent who, up until that time, had some bona fides. Um, I don't know why he went off the rails, but he did. And I think that can absolutely make that interview with Helena suspect.
Yeah.
You know what? Were they feeding her? Were they leading her
Oh yeah.
through a lot of that?
False memory really got a thorough workout during this period of time.
Oh, yeah.
Implanted memories and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And
we've talked
largely
about
and
that.
largely because of this. This report at this time. This really spurred a lot of people to do very damaging things to other people.
Absolutely. And all based upon lies, based upon flawed science with things like recovered memory,
Mm-hmm.
which we've talked about in the Satanic show. But yeah, Gunderson was the guy who pushed a lot of that. And I think that absolutely makes that interview suspect. But yeah, and it was that interview, and then let's see. I lost my spot because I was going through there looking for the file, the info that I got on him. Most of it was from the Southern Poverty Law Center. Has an entire huge folder on Gunderson.
Hmm.
But
Oh, talk about an organization that lost its way.
yeah, oh, they absolutely did. I mean, there's no doubt about that. That was even before the allegations of sexual impropriety against
Right.
guys like Morris Dees. But I think they're trustworthy on him, though.
Well, it was a while ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he died, and I think it was like, I would have to look again, but I think it was 1989. But yeah, this crime, it just gets more and more bizarre. The other thing with the scene that should have made it a bit easier, but it didn't exactly. Every single person in the MacDonald house that night had a different blood type. Jeff had
Oh,
B
yeah.
type blood.
I'll,
Colette had A-type.
the floor plan shows how that was dispersed throughout the house.
Yep. And so the prosecution's theory with that, and this really didn't change a whole lot from the Article 32 to the civilian trial. An argument begins between Colette and Jeff in the master bedroom. It escalates. Jeff picks up a piece of wood that was used under the bed to prop it up and starts beating Colette. Kim, meanwhile, hears in her room and gets out of bed. Jeff swings the stick around, hitting her, crushing her skull, about 1 to 2 inches in, with a blunt force wound. When he realizes what he did, he carries Kim to her bed. And meanwhile, Colette wakes up, goes to Kristen's room, trying to, protect her, and is bludgeoned again in the back of the head by Jeff. And after this, he's figuring what to do. And, he's probably a little rattled. I would be if I were in that situation.
Yeah.
But he finds a Manson article in the Esquire magazine under the coffee table. And the magazine has AB blood on it. Kimberly's blood. So basically what he does from there, according to the prosecution's theory, is come up with an ad hoc way to stage it.
Because, when you've committed a triple homicide, the first thing you want to do is read a magazine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. There's no doubt.
Come on.
I mean, I'm not sure how they would have found their blood there, though. Her blood on it.
Yeah.
And, he didn't even really need the magazine to know about the Manson details.
Absolutely. It was all the news wanted to talk about.
Absolutely. Definitely. But their idea was he comes up with this ad hoc theory to stage the scene. So he goes and he grabs a knife, and he starts stabbing Kirsten with it, and then he grabs an ice pick and stabs Colette with it. And he writes pig in her blood on the headboard of the bed. And meanwhile, before he did this, he grabbed some of his surgical gloves from beneath the sink, and he got the blood on it to write pig, so he wouldn't leave his prints. They found actually B blood, Jeff's blood, on the kitchen floor near a pack of surgical gloves. And there was also B blood at the bathroom sink. And that is basically their theory of it, as to what happened.
I think it's a stupid theory.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
but...
problem. Some of it might make sense, but there are other things that are quite a bit of a reach.
Yeah, especially the magazine.
Yeah.
Although I wonder how her blood would have gotten on there. Maybe it's just transfer evidence.
Again, how many people went through the crime scene? 27?
This is true. 27.
Are you telling me none of those people got blood on them and smeared it somewhere else?
Oh, yeah. And then the other thing with that as well, what are the odds that any of the 4 hippies could have had that blood type? Remember, we're not talking about DNA. We're just talking about a type.
Types, yeah. Whereas, O-type blood is the most... No, it's not the most common, it's universal. What's the most common? B?
B, from what I was looking at, was about 10% of the population. I should have written down where I got those stats, but I have them written down here. And then AB blood is about 10%. But then O has got to be bigger.
Most common blood type. Ba-doop, ba-doop, ba-doo. O positive. Looks like the winner.
Oh, I bet with that.
A
But yeah,
positive. A positive is second. AB is one of the most rare.
mm-hmm. But
But that doesn't mean, it's still 1% of the population, right?
yeah,
That's still a lot of people.
yeah. Oh, and absolutely. I mean, even if they weren't fighting, even if it wasn't from, a struggle that got the blood out, it could be from the IV drug use if they were in there doing that. So it's not, out of line to say, hey, it could be from the hippies. Um,
Yeah. But there's no indication that from Jeffrey that there was any kind of a fight where somebody got wounded, right?
yeah, and that was the big thing again with the coffee table. They were debating about that, but the other thing was there were greeting cards that were up near where they said the fight took place, and none of them got moved, which they found very weird. They were standing up, and none of them at all got moved.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that, I don't know with that, but
It's weird, but it's not necessarily indicative of anything. Like
yeah,
maybe if there was a struggle, it just didn't reach that area, right?
yeah. I mean, it very well could be. Or, with everybody who was in there, maybe one person put them back up.
That's right. Oh, look, these are
The
all
way they
knocked
did with
over,
the phone.
right? Some
Yeah,
some OCD type,
yeah. Maybe the same guy who put the phone back on the hook.
right?
That was another weird thing about this. A weird bit of evidence. There was another guy on base who called the house that night. And I forget this guy's name. It's somewhere in my notes. If I get to it, I'll mention it. He called because he thought MacDonald was the doctor who was treating his cold or whatever he had,
Yeah.
and he needed some help. But his real doctor was McDonald, a
Ah,
totally different one. So it was a clerical error with the phone people that routed him to the MacDonald house.
interesting.
And he said, yeah, and he said that when he called, there was a woman who picked up the phone and just giggled when he asked for Dr. McDonald.
Really? What time was this, supposedly?
This was about the time that they would have been in the house, around I think 1:32 in the morning.
See, it was the one-armed man.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a bit that I don't think you can um, discount, because this
No,
guy has no reason to lie about it
he,
either.
right.
He didn't then, and he doesn't now.
By the way,
Um,
this switchboards were still a thing.
yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, even on the base, when Dr. McDonald, if you believe his story, when he tried to call somebody to come to the house and help, they didn't call 911 on the base there. They
There-
call a central area which routes it to a sergeant.
Right. Because there was no 911.
Is there on military bases? That's a
I don't.
question I don't
Well,
know.
that's a good question, but it didn't exist anywhere at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if you believe what he said, he got up and he saw all this destruction, and he was acting very coolly, but you would expect that of a military surgeon,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
His doctor thinking immediately clicks in,
You hope
and he,
you
goes through
you
there.
want them to be like that.
Absolutely. That is their training. When
Yeah.
you're talking about not just a military surgeon, you're talking about a Green Beret surgeon.
Yeah.
So that I don't think is weird at all. But the civilian trial started July 19, 1979, in Raleigh. And
Now,
it was Wade Smith.
why did they have a civilian trial? What made
A
them,
big part
what,
of that was Freddie Kassab agitating
okay.
for it.
But they
And
didn't
there's still quite
necessarily
a few
have
people.
anything big, aha evidence, nothing new.
No. I mean, he went through like the transcript from the Article 32, and he had some questions like if Jeff went into Kristen's room trying to help her, why didn't he turn the lights on? Stuff that might be weird or off, but it's not a smoking gun
Mm-hmm.
by any stretch.
Right.
Um, but they started it, and that was Jim Blackburn for the prosecution. This was his first felony trial. And interestingly enough, some years after this, Mr. Blackburn was stripped of his license to practice law, and he was also charged with a few counts of felony fraud.
The prosecutor?
Yeah, and
What?
this was for apparently, I guess you could say forging certain legal documents and things like affidavits, not in MacDonald's trial, but in other trials that he did.
This is in the
And
South,
so
isn't it?
this is Raleigh, North Carolina.
Southern law.
So that's the problem there with this guy. You have, he's pretty well tarnished. That's the thing with, prosecutors, even when you find that sort of evidence that they're doing something wrong, you can go and put that back and look in at all their other trials. What else did he do?
Right.
But yeah, he was charged with a few felony counts, and I guess a lot of it was stemming from a mental illness that he didn't know he had, or he tried to say that.
Yeah, people are still claiming that kind of thing
Yeah.
when they tweet the wrong thing.
Oh yeah. Oh, Ambien made me do it. But, but
Well, that can be true if you mix it with alcohol.
this is true. But yeah, Blackburn is a bit of a character. He, for instance, went into the evidence lockup and he wore the blue pajama top that had been placed over Colette at the scene.
Okay.
And he said to get close to the evidence was his quote or what have you. But he took a one that was a likeness of it, a close likeness, into court. And he had another guy using an ice pick to go through it because there were 27 holes in it.
Mm.
And what he found with that was the way that it was being held, because if you believe MacDonald's narrative, it was pulled over his head somewhat, so it was loose when he
Okay.
was being stabbed with it.
Okay.
So the prosecutors were holding it that way. And they found that when you go at it with an ice pick like that, it doesn't leave the round holes that were found. What it does is it gets into it and it tears it.
Oh. Poor guy, he had to
And
wear it while he was stabbed
well,
for court.
well, well, their hypothesis was that it wasn't him who wore it at all, that he put it on Colette when he stabbed her with the ice pick and then took it off. Again, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Did it have her blood on it?
I believe it did. But there were, round holes in it, no tears. So it had to be somehow rigid when they were stabbing it. But yeah, I mean, they go through that, and they also found some blue fibers under Colette and under Kim, which means that it wasn't necessarily on They said that Jeffrey laid Colette's body on a sheet after that and put the top over Colette to contaminate it.
Hmm.
I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah,
The defense.
DNA clears up a lot of this nonsense.
Well, remember, this is 1979, too.
Right, yeah, this was. We got another 20 years before DNA evidence is solidly used.
Oh, yeah. Quite a while. Meanwhile, the defense subpoenas Helena Stokely, and the FBI is sent to retrieve her.
Okay.
But they question her, and she basically says, I don't know anything, and stonewalls the defense.
Oh, really?
So it totally backfired, yeah. Now, the judge, in fact, throughout watching this, called her a blinking light bulb, not screwed on type.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Oh.
Oh, that's harsh and hilarious at the same time.
Yeah. A blinking light bulb, not screwed on too tight. Um,
I gotta remember that one.
and the judge also didn't permit witnesses attesting to what she had said before, her earlier admissions.
That seems fair.
Yeah, I mean, he denied it on the basis of it being hearsay, according to them. But, some of them said there's kind of some bias there, too.
They can't testify to what they heard somebody else say.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. August 3rd, that was only about 2 weeks after the trial started, the jury visits 544 Castle Drive. It was kept the way it was in 1970. Nobody changed anything.
For how
Although now
long?
I believe it's about 10 years.
Holy crap.
Although I believe they've demolished it now. I can't remember what year. But the jury, they ended up deliberating 6 hours. Guilty on murder 1 for Colette, guilty on murder 2 for Kimberly, and murder 1 for Kirsten was their ultimate conclusion.
Wow.
And now, during all this speaks again to Freddie Kassab. Jeffrey McDonald actually wore a bulletproof vest when they were going to read that verdict. So that's just how Kassab was. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a lawyer who has some knowledge of this. He was also in the military. And his thoughts on Kassab was that he might have gotten to a lot of these witnesses, too, and made them basically unreliable. Not just Stokely, but, others that were in there.
Really?
So that's just, I mean, like I said, he was driven. He was a driven guy.
Well, the problem with that kind of drive is how you frame it to yourself, and clearly he was looking for someone to be, to blame. He wasn't necessarily looking for the right person to blame.
Oh, yeah.
He wanted someone, which is often the case you see in law enforcement and, DA's offices. They want to put someone behind bars.
Oh, yeah. They get tunnel vision with it, or, there's less good reasons where they're just flat out corrupt. But I think most often it's probably tunnel vision that causes that. Oh, I found some of these conspiracies.
Well, and the perverse incentives of their job are the more people you put in jail, the more you get promoted in pay raise. And
absolutely,
they don't care if they're the right people. They just want lots of people.
Justice takes a backseat to body count.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here's a bit more on Gunderson. I finally came to that spot.
Before
Before we get there, the judge gave him 3 consecutive life sentences immediately after the verdict. That was the harshest possible sentence he could hand down. Um, and he also said on Stokely, the judge said this further, "You are in a constant state of hallucination." Probably accurate.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, Gunderson. So he ran the Memphis, Dallas, and LA PI offices. He became a PI on the McMartin case, and he fixated on the satanic abuse idea. And then he branched out to the Illuminati.
Of course.
The SPLC says, quote, "He sold his services shielding people from electrostatic sensory manipulation and testing for brain implants, tracking chips, and resonant cavities." I'm not even sure what that is.
I'm not sure I want to know.
But we're not even done. He said the Oklahoma City bombing was a false flag attack. He says a cure for Down syndrome was being kept from the public. The government practices mind control. His kids have alien DNA. And he was actually sued for libel by the late night host Art Bell.
Wow.
Art Bell, he sued him after apparently Gunderson called him a pedophile.
Well, that'd do it.
Oh, and Gunderson, also sued the Church of Scientology, but ultimately dropped his suit. So,
I've seen a couple of cases of people who have been, very solid, reliable citizens for all their lives, and then they get to a point like in their 50s, and they just start spiraling into conspiracies and weird ideas, and
yeah,
and they get credibility because they used to be reliable, solid people.
wow. No, I mean, they definitely do. I mean, rarely, though, I think you see somebody with, like I said, the bona fides that he had. And he died in 2011 in Memphis. So, yeah, that was Gunderson. And then you look at the guy who was interviewing Helena Stokely with him, Prince Beasley, of the Fayetteville police.
Yeah.
He kind of had a reputation as a crooked cop, if you talk to some people. In fact, a lot of friends of Helena had said that he would pressure her and he was basically her drug supply. Beasley was. So, I mean, you have people on all sides of this who are just tainted out the wazoo.
Yep.
And that's part of what makes this so fascinating.
It seems like he was convicted based on the story that the prosecution told, not on the evidence.
Pretty much. And he still is sitting in prison.
Well,
Jeffrey McDonald is. Now, Errol Morris is pretty confident. He believes he was innocent.
Really?
I honestly don't know which side I would come down on with it.
It's very weird, and it's pretty ambiguous, I gotta say.
It is. That's where the title of his book, A Wilderness of Error, I think is pretty apt. But, Morris is a guy I would trust, too, in his assessment of it. For people who haven't looked him up, he had another documentary called The Thin Blue Line in the late 80s.
Oh, yeah.
Where it actually got a guy off of a murder rap. A guy who was innocent. He got him off.
I think I've seen that a long time ago.
I believe it's on Netflix right now, actually. Might look that up while we're here, but yeah, that case is it's one of the weirdest ones I think you'll look at.
Well, it just goes to show, as any lawyer would tell you, innocence is not a defense.
Oh, yeah. No, it isn't. It's what they
It's what you can,
believe.
it's what you can prove and what you can't prove, and what you can make the jury believe.
Yep.
And
Can you get that reasonable doubt?
think about this. What if he didn't do it, right? And
Yeah.
how do you prove that you didn't do it?
Yeah, it's very tough. And it gets even tougher when you have the journalist Joe McGinnis, who basically ingratiated himself to MacDonald in 1979. And he wrote a book called, I think we have the picture of the made-for-TV movie with it.
Oh yeah.
He wrote the book about it that essentially, at best, what it did was it exaggerated the hell out of what we know about what happened with Jeff in it. Um, Fatal Vision, that was the name of it.
There it is, coming right up.
Made into a TV movie, and that was a big part of the problem there. That became a narrative in people's heads, and it ultimately, I think, kind of corrupted the juries that looked at it too.
Right, right. Unfortunately, yeah, a lot of people. So this is kind of a weird parallel, but if three different artists have recorded the same song, you're most likely to like the one you heard first.
Yeah, this is true.
And so if you saw the TV movie and then were sitting on the trial in the jury box, you know, you may not care what the evidence says. I mean, you may try to, but there may be very well be a part of you goes, well, that's not what they said in the movie,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
or or
Yeah,
you,
and
or it just biases your view of all the evidence in it slants it towards guilty.
absolutely. And it biases the whole a pillar of our Constitution, a fair trial.
Yeah.
When you're doing that, in fact, the defense, when they heard that that was coming out, they sent a cease and desist letter to NBC saying, "Can you just wait until after his trial to air it?" And of course, NBC flipped them the bird and said, "No, we have First Amendment on
Well,
that."
it's not. Yeah, they do have First Amendment, but
Oh,
they
absolutely.
clearly don't have decency.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, you can't legislate decency
Yeah.
with something like that. But McGinnis, he got a lot of his information from MacDonald when he taped him. Basically, every conversation they had, he made a secret tape.
Oh,
And MacDonald admitted at the time to taking a drug called escatrol.
never heard
And
of it.
escatrol, I hadn't either. And what it is, it's dexedrine, which is dextroamphetamine sulfate. It's Ritalin, basically.
Right.
And compazine, which compazine is an atypical antipsychotic. And it can also be used as a anti-nausea drug. But it's in the phenothiazine drug group. And what it can cause very weird reactions. In fact, it's one drug that I'm allergic to because of that.
Hmm.
They gave it to me for nausea at the hospital once,
Yeah.
and I had what was called akathisia from it. It meant I literally could not stop moving all over my body.
Whoa.
And they had to wait until it was out of my system, to stop that. Although they could have given me like Valium to stop it, but
Hmm.
they didn't. Compazine is also in it, and that is just such a weird drug. The phenothiazines as a group can cause that reaction, and they can also cause, I don't know if people have heard this term, but they've definitely heard it in a list of side effects, tardive dyskinesia, which you can get from a whole
Nope.
lot
Never
of
heard of it.
anti. You can get it from all sorts of antidepressants and other drugs. It's where your arms, it's a movement disorder like that, where you usually get stuck and you can't move your muscles.
Oh, really?
Like you get, yeah, where your arm will get plastered to your chest and your face will be down, you just can't move. And it can be permanent, tardive dyskinesia.
What?
Yeah.
And
It's
nobody can move you?
basically. I mean,
Wow.
they can't move the stuff back; it just gets stuck.
Wow.
Um, there's, like I said, there's a whole lot of drugs that can cause that. I'll see if I can find a
Holy
link on
crap.
it. Yeah,
That seems like a
most of them are psychotropic drugs.
very unpleasant side effect, especially if it's permanent.
Yep, side effect of antipsychotics. This is from the Mayo. These drugs are used to treat schizophrenia and other mental health disorders, but it can also be caused, like I said, from SSRIs and antidepressants.
It must be
Wish I
pretty
had a
rare
picture.
because you don't see people just walking around with their arms stuck in place.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's rare, but it can happen.
Yeah.
Um,
It's not rare if it happens to you.
here's a trustworthy source on it from the U.S. National Library of Medicine. It's TARDIVEDYSKINESIA. I will post a link.
Yeah. So what's the connection to the case with this? He was taking this, and
Yes, it
and
could.
could explain some like blackout.
It could explain. It could also explain a mood flipping. It could explain the argument,
Hmm.
especially with the amphetamines that can make you more cranked up like that.
Gotcha.
And compazine honestly isn't all that potent as an antipsychotic, so it probably wouldn't balance that out if that was happening.
Did anybody try to explain why he was taking antipsychotics, Mr. Surgeon? Why do you need an antipsychotic?
I honestly do not know with that. I mean, I could understand the amphetamines with that if he had to stay
Sure.
up for long periods,
Sure,
doing
absolutely.
rounds.
Absolutely.
But I am not sure why he would fuck around with a antipsychotic in there.
Yeah, that seems to be, to use a medical term, contraindicated
Yes,
for his
yes,
job description.
yep. This is, in fact, the Wikipedia entry on Escatrol. And it was an amphetamine weight loss agent which was removed by the FDA in 1981 after SmithKline and French, the manufacturer, failed to provide the therapeutic or failed to prove the therapeutic effectiveness.
Ah,
At the time, it was among the 200 most widely prescribed drugs in the U.S. A couple others included Dexamyl and Desputal. Escatrol contained dextroamphetamine sulfate and prochloropyrazine, which is compazine. I don't know why they would put both of those in there for weight
that
loss.
seems weird.
So if you were to
Stimulants,
go after that,
stimulants like Adderall and Ritalin sometimes have appetite suppressing side effects, but they're not.
that I
They
knew.
they don't always last.
That I knew, and that's where I was trying to figure out why they would put compazine in with it
Yeah.
for weight loss. If they were trying to go after weight loss from the psychological or psychiatric point of view, you would do that with something like a antidepressant, perhaps. Something.
Yeah, or a Xanax or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, granted, a lot of antidepressants have the weight gain as a side effect, but it seems kind of weird you would put an antipsychotic in a diet pill.
It does seem weird.
Um, but
But sometimes medications have a different effect at a low dose than they do at a high dose.
this is true. I wonder
So
what the.
could
I'm
be
gonna have
some,
to ask
who
like
knows.
somebody I know.
We're
Who,
just wildly
yeah,
speculating at this point.
basically. I mean, I know quite a bit about pharmacology, but I do not know enough to answer that. So,
And it's okay.
yep. It was, let's see, 1984 when Fatal Vision premiered, ultimately.
So
In the country, we loved
if
it.
he's still in prison, his appeals apparently didn't pan out.
No, they didn't, and he argued it was because of Fatal Vision.
That seems to be a solid argument.
Yeah, I agree. Um, a lot of people loved it. It was one of the higher rated TV movies of that era.
Good chance I saw it.
Um,
I don't remember it, but there's a good chance I saw it at the time.
yeah. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and it's sad, really, that they didn't wait.
Yeah. Well, nobody's seen it today. They could.
Yeah, you could go to YouTube and watch it.
No, I'm just
I mean,
saying
it's
more.
there.
Could he? I'm surprised they haven't tried to do DNA testing. But what would DNA tell you? Only that if somebody else was in the room and got wounded.
Basically. Ned assumes that there's still a lot of evidence there too.
Right.
It might have just degraded,
Yep.
especially with how it was originally handled.
Yep.
But yeah, and you get into the hippie story in Helena. We entered at 2 a.m. The three other hippies were talking to Jeffrey. Things got tense. The three knock him out. The phone rings. Someone asks for Dr. McDonald, and Helena picks up the receiver. It was Jimmy Fryer, who was sick and being treated by Dr. McDonald, not Mac. And Fryer just heard female giggling and the line. He heard sounds of a fight in the background. He used the word scrimmage. This is how he described it.
Scrimmage. That's a curious term for that.
Yeah. Helena hangs up, and she said at the time she was high on mescaline.
Mm.
But who knows? Dim light bulb and all.
Yeah.
Now, there was another interesting part of this with one of the guys who was supposedly another hippie. He, some years after the murders in 1970, ends up going to a house. It's an old Victorian house that's near Fort Bragg in Fayetteville that was ran by this group that their whole thing was, we're going to treat you, you're going to kick your addiction. They weren't like 12-steppers, but they were an independent group.
Okay.
With people, living in it. And this guy, he goes there, and you go to the manor house, is what it was called.
And where was this manor house again?
Near Fayetteville,
Okay.
near Fort Bragg.
Okay.
And now this guy, his name was Greg Mitchell. He served 3 to 4 tours in Vietnam. Let's see. He showed Helena pictures of war atrocities, apparently, when he was there. A necklace of fingers is one thing she talked about. And Mitchell, meanwhile, enters a church rehab center. That's what they were. Manor House in Fayetteville. He's interviewed for there by a woman by the name of Ann Kennedy Sutton, who got him in. That Saturday, they had their prayer meeting, where people basically, they confess their sins. I guess you could call it step 4,
Right.
in essence.
Yeah.
And this guy, Greg, became so excitable, he had to be restrained when he was there doing that. Maybe he was high, who knows? And the next day, Sutton is driving up to the house. She sees Greg running away. And inside the house, in red paint on a wall, was, quote, "I killed Dr. McDonald's wife and children."
Nobody ever followed up on this?
They really didn't. I mean, they didn't take a photo, which they should have.
Yeah.
They cleaned the wall pretty quick. But there's sworn affidavits from her and others to having seen that. Oh, and let's see. Fryer, meanwhile, was locked up in the late 70s for check fraud. He had mental health issues, too.
Wow. A lot of that going around.
Yeah. Yep. That's where you get this on both sides. It's so thick.
Wow.
Man.
What a sad stew.
Yeah. It'll probably never be sorted out. Short of maybe a deathbed confession from somebody reliable, but that's the problem.
Right? Everybody's on something or fucked in the head or something, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it even got to the point where the FBI agents that supposedly went and picked Helena up around the time of the trial,
Yeah.
that didn't go down the way that they said. They didn't pick her up where they said.
What?
And that was basically, there was the guy who was driving. His boss, his supervisors, said that he was kind of a glory hound and a bit of a pain in the ass as an underling. And he was kind of trying to insert himself more into the case than what he actually did. So you can't even trust that part of it.
Wow. That's nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, it is so bizarre. On like every possible level.
Man. There's, yeah. At least you can't, there doesn't seem to be any indication that anybody was acting out of malice, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, well, besides maybe Beasley.
Right.
But yeah, the rest of them, I don't think there was a lot of malice. And even with the prosecutor Blackburn, he just seemed like he had
they might be
issue.
they might just be Fruit Loops, but they're not. I don't think they're, trying to railroad this guy. We're gonna get him.
Yeah.
Sometimes you see that.
Yeah, and oh yeah, sometimes, most definitely. And you have good investigators who know what they're doing coming down on both sides of this.
Yeah.
Saying, yeah, he should remain locked up, and saying, no, this was a travesty.
Yeah, that's unusual, too.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's weighted to one side or the other. Like most of the investigators lean one way, and maybe you have one person on the other side.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, usually you do. Usually, they're labeled as cranks on the minority side.
Right.
But with this one, you really don't have a minority side.
Well, that's just interesting.
I think that, without question, though, he definitely deserves a new trial.
Yeah. Well, but the problem is where's the new evidence?
Yeah.
Where
I mean, there might
not be any evidence left, right?
Yeah, I mean, there might not be, but you could also argue that there were some irregularities with the first one, that it
Well,
wasn't necessarily fair.
yeah, I'm saying, is there enough surviving evidence to even have a new trial? That was my point.
Yeah, yeah, good question. I mean, like we said, it might have all decayed. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yep.
That assumes that the army even kept much of it.
Exactly.
That was, I think, a big part of the problem. You know, those investigators just didn't know what they were doing when they went in.
Things have changed. Not
Yeah.
not perfect by any means, but I think the trend line is good as far as investigative practices.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and with that, what I meant was just the army when they went in.
Oh yeah.
I think a big part of that was, you know, they don't have to investigate murders that much on a military base.
No, not very often.
Yep.
Cool. Well, I mean, you know what
Yeah,
I
I
mean.
think that we've
Fascinating
told a lot in
story.
this case. If you missed part one, you can get it at the Facebook page
Absolutely. Go catch
or
up.
on the stream here. Yep.
Alrighty.
And I think that's all you got on him for now.
Well, that's plenty. That's a very good story.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about this when we started.
I didn't either until I watched the docu on it.
All right. Well, thanks again, Wes, and good night, everybody.
Good night.